coming to get you, Barbara. They're coming for you, Barbara. Look, there comes one of them now.
Welcome to the latest episode of the movie breakdown. Welcome to September. And for some of you, enjoy your time back to school. I am your host, Christopher Spicer. And as has been the rule for the last year or so, with the few episodes that we have posted, it's just me here talking to you about movies. And of course, this show is brought to you from Beyond the Balcony, our website where it's been since way back in 2013 when this show started, and as well from our hosting site Spreaker Prime, the place where if you get over 1,000 downloads, 1,000 listeners on I think a weekly basis, you can have them as your host site. Some of the top podcasts in crime, entertainment, maybe gardening, or whatever people podcast about, you can find it there at Spreaker Prime. They've got a wide selection there. And what am I talking about this week? Well, I still have not reviewed any 2025 movies. That's now the running gag. Let's see if I even get one movie in before the year is done. But I am going to talk about something where it's September now. It's back to school, but not just back to school. This is the time of year when a lot of programs start up again. And this is sort of the September in a lot of ways is more of a fresh start than January is, because my kids are going to start doing tap, singing lessons are starting up again, theater's getting back in its groove, and so usually summer's sort of when you're off, and then September's a lot of times where work starts buckling down again. I actually used to have a job where our financial year began in September, because it was a camp. And so it was the end of the summer camp, and they're starting now with like the school groups and the guest groups that would come in. And so we saw September as sort of, again, the kickoff to their year. And so in a lot of ways, September is sort of the great time to sort of come up with your resolutions or your goals or your plans for the year, because a lot of places kind of operate from September to August rather than, January to January. And I'm saying that because, as you know, I'm a freelance writer. And as you know, I've had some ups and downs emotionally. I have hit a bit of a career rut in the last few years. And this year has been sort of an opportunity for me to grow and to better understand myself, as I've revealed on this podcast, learning that I am autistic and I have ADHD, which then some people call it ADHD, so autism blended with ADHD, which is its own fun adventure, and I'm still sort of trying to piece that all together, figure out how I'm going to go forward with that. But all that to be say that I want to see this September as a way to really get things back on track. So that is this podcast, that is the website Beyond the Balcony, that is my freelance writing career, be it pitching to different editors, wanting to write about sort of neurodivergence, write about parenting, write about pop culture, movies, be it, again, like more movie reviews, start working on sort of the books and the novels and the short stories that I've been allowing to just fester away in my head or bubble away in my head. It's not necessarily festering, it's a positive. It's a boiling pot of magic ideas that have been boiling there. And I want September to sort of be the road to start that all happening. And my career is all sort of about creativity. And so today I want to look at 5 movies that I feel inspire my creativity. 5 movies that get me excited, that motivate me, that get my creative juices going. And my number one movie The first one I'm going to start with is not likely one that you would attach to the idea of being about creativity, or one that would motivate one to sort of start projects and do jobs. But if you have read my website, or if you know me for any amount of time, this shouldn't surprise you too much, and that is Star Wars. Because even though Star Wars is not in itself necessarily about creativity, this has always been my favorite movie. And I was absolutely obsessed with it as a young kid. And I wrote a piece many years ago on Beyond the Balcony where I credit Star Wars as the picture that really got me into loving movies, loving storytelling, and wanting to become a writer. After watching Star Wars, I remember walking around with notebooks and constantly coming up with story ideas. The first few stories were definitely just reworkings of the Star Wars movie or set in the Star Wars universe. But over time, I expanded and I did more fantasy stories, different sci-fi, and then even stories that were more grounded in reality. But that idea of wanting to create my own world, create my own characters, to be able to tell a story that sends somebody on an adventure and puts you on an emotional roller coaster. It all started with me being obsessed with Star Wars, the love of Star Wars. And how I remember it is essentially I loved Star Wars, watched it many, many times. And I think, again, now knowing about my neurodivergence, I became obsessed and I wanted to watch all the possible documentaries, read all the books, and learn as much as I can about Star Wars. And that's when I sort of was introduced to the idea that a movie has a creator behind it. A movie is a story. The Star Wars wasn't this real thing that was unfolding in front of me. Someone had to take the time to imagine it and create it. And so that is where I got excited of realizing I could tell my own stories. And I wanted to learn more about filmmaking and how that came about, and learning about all the different inspirations that George Lucas had to make Star Wars. To learn about Akira Kurosawa and Hidden Fortress and Flash Gordon and John Carter, and just the numerous things, all the myths and classic storytelling that inspired them. I dug into it. I wanted to learn more about mythology. I wanted to learn more about classic storytelling. I wanted to learn more about the hero's journey. And so Star Wars was the door for me into becoming more interested in the art of storytelling and just artistry in itself, and that idea of how you can get other people to become obsessed with a work or to inspire them and to just believe in the possibilities of different worlds, different characters, different journeys, different adventures. And it all started with Star Wars for me. So every time I watch the original Star Wars, which most people now know as A New Hope, it spurs something in me. It triggers, it gets that creative juices flowing again. And it's all because it sort of hit that switch in young neurodivergent Christopher of, I want to learn more about Star Wars. And then when I went behind that curtain and discovered George Lucas and his own journey and his own storytelling and his own obsessions, it then got me now more interested in this idea of learning about filmmaking and learning about the creative process. And that is something I've always been excited about, and has always been something I've been interested in, is learning about the creative process. What motivated someone to tell the story that they did? What led them to that idea? And there's always, in some ways to me, a more fascinating story behind that. Like the idea that Star Wars exists because George Lucas couldn't get the rights to Flash Gordon. To me, that's fascinating, because what would have the movie world been like if George Lucas made his own version of Flash Gordon and thus Star Wars was never created. What would have that done to blockbuster filmmaking? What would have that done with the big tent poles and all the things that Star Wars inspired? Would have Flash Gordon be able to do the same thing in that alternate world? Maybe it didn't. Maybe it still did. But all that type of stuff, just the minutia and the sort of the sausage making, as they say, that metaphor, that idea of how a story is actually composed, how an epic is actually made, how a big mainstream story is actually launched. That stuff has always been fascinating to me. And it all became because of Star Wars. Star Wars is what instigated that whole sort of fascination in my life. And I'm a storyteller. I'm a movie critic. I'm a podcaster. I am an essayist. I am a man full of verbal diarrhea, all I think in a lot of ways because of Star Wars. And so to me, that movie is always going to be considered sort of my number one when it comes to inspiring my creativity. My next one is A Princess Bride. And this, once again, I think inspires me because of just the fascinating world that Princess Bride creates, the fascinating characters, the visuals. I've always been more of a fantasy person than a sci-fi person, even though I love Star Wars. Star Wars in a lot of ways is more of a fantasy. And so something like Princess Bride is right up my wheelhouse. William Goldman made the book first and then adapted it into a screenplay, which then was directed by Rob Reiner. And this picture, part of the inspiration for my creativity is just the fact that I do like fantasy. I do like world building. I do like unique characters. And so the movie itself just sparks a lot of interesting ideas in me. But I just also like how the picture plays with sort of so many tropes. It's got the revenge tale in there with the Indigo Montoya trying to seek the man who killed his father, the man with 6 fingers on one hand. It's got sort of the giant who seems evil but's got a heart of gold. It's got the trying to save the princess. It's got the rogue, the person who's considered a pirate, but you realize he's actually the hero. The sinister subplot by the king with his devious plans. The magic, the heel maker, the magic person who could bring the person back to life. Like the evil creature in the woods. It plays with so many of the tropes, but then makes such a memorable, unforgettable story. And I think that's what motivates me, because one of the things you know as a storyteller is there's no one truly original idea. The originality, the intrigue, the magic in storytelling comes from the storyteller himself. The storyteller does it from their perspective. It's how you take that story in a different direction. You take those classic tales and then you sort of freshen it up. You bring in those new perspectives. You find ways of meshing in different, like I say, tropes or ideas. And I think Princess Bride shows how you can take all this classic material, what looks like sort of a straightforward fantasy tale that's been told 1,000 times, and you do something fresh and unique, and you have made this picture that is so many people's favorite movies and is held up as a classic. And like I said, you can argue, well, it's not even really that original of a story, but it's the way that William Goldman does it. It's the way that he brings in these fresh characters, different perspectives, and the way that he puts together and sews together all these sort of classic moments in storytelling into something that's fresh and unique. And of course, then it's got the sense of humor. It's got the wit. It allows Robin Wright to be sort of a strong princess that stands up for herself. It's got that personality. I just also love the fact that when you have the bit of essentially the grandfather who is reading the story to the sick boy. He doesn't want to go to school. He would rather kind of stay home and play video games. But his grandfather, played by Peter Falk, to his grandson, played by Fred Savage, he offers him this story, which he's not interested in because, it's got the kissy stuff in it. It's got the romance. But as the boy listens to the story and lets his grandfather read it to him, he gets attached. He really cares about these characters. He gets enthralled into the world. He gets pulled in. And that's the magic of good storytelling, is how it can connect with people and how even on the surface, you're like, I'm not interested in the story, but when you're open to it, when you're ready to go on this journey, even the stories that at first that don't seem appealing can connect to you when you've got those sort of memorable characters and you have those memorable moments. And I think that's what excites me about Princess Bride, is that it's about the power of storytelling. I also like the gentleness that's throughout this story. That's always a thing that sort of connects with me. The idea that, you have the Andre the Giant's character, Fezzik, who redeems himself. Inigo Montoya, who at one point, again, is sort of considered a villain at the beginning, but he's truly just trying to avenge his father. Of course, the connecting romance between Wesley and Princess Buttercup. And I think all those moments, there's this gentleness, there is this bonding, there's this idea of forgiveness, this idea of how kindness and love can overcome the greatest challenges. And I guess I'm just a big sap for that type of stuff. And I think, to me, I love stories that they can have a darkness, they can have an edge, they can even have sadness at the end. But I feel like any great story at some point has that glimmer of hope, that idea of sort of the power of true goodness. And I think Princess Bride is able to do that with all its sort of humor and silliness and adventure. It is truly a story about hope. And so that always really inspires my creativity. The next one has nothing to do with, well, maybe that's not totally true, but on the surface, it's not necessarily about storytelling, but it is about creation. And that is Chef, which is directed by Jon Favreau and stars Jon Favreau and is written by Jon Favreau. It's essentially about a head chef who gets fired from his restaurant job, or he quits. There's an issue with a critic. And so he decides to buy a food truck, take his estranged son on this journey with him, and try to bring back his creative passion. And right there is what kind of inspires me, is this is a great movie that's about the creative process. It's about how it's so important to find your passion again, to find your love, and how that ability to create and to use your imagination and to just really delve into your love and really make something that you throw your heart and soul into can truly lift you up and make you whole again and make you a happier person. And that's what this is about. He's just in the dingy food truck, but he falls in love with the art of cooking again, the art of making masterful and wonderful food. And I love this movie in that it really shows the creative process. It shows you making the dishes. You can see each piece of food. And again, my creative leanings come from like performing and definitely from telling stories through a writing perspective. But this is still, he is telling a story. He is creating art. He just does it through food. And I love movies that show you the creative process. I love movies that show you someone who is passionate, imaginative, creative, and being able to just lean into that job and truly be vulnerable, be themselves, and put themselves out there. And that's what this is. He's in a food truck. He doesn't have any job security, and he is making himself vulnerable. He's throwing his heart out there, trying to connect with an audience. In this case, obviously, it's patrons, it's people who are hungry. And it's an incredible movie. I gave it high acclaim when we reviewed on the podcast. So it came out in 2014. Both me and Scott gave it high thumbs up. And I believe it both made our best of the year list, or it made it very close. It was just a movie that it really connected with us as people who are creative and are the sort of storytellers. And I think this is just an inspirational movie. If you love food, if you love cooking, you're going to like this picture. But I think if you're someone who does get inspired by movies that are about the creative process, you will see something in it too. And Chef really motivates me, inspires me every time I see it. The next picture, again, is not necessarily about the creative process, but it has always inspired me and has deeply connected with me, and that is Inside Out. Now, I understand with Inside Out, when you have emotions, when you have joy and sadness and anger and disgust and fear, that this is supposed to be about, it is like a neurotypical girl. It's trying to show you how it's like a very fantasy way of sort of how the brain works. And I think that a lot of people recognize it as a fantasy can relate to sort of different things with having like your imaginary friend and your imagination and just the different emotions that sometimes can drive you and how they conflict, but how in the end, in order to see happiness, you do need sadness. And I think there is that universality to it. But someone who's neurodivergent, and I mean, when I saw this movie, I didn't know that I was autistic or that I had ADHD, but I always felt a little bit different. I think I connected to this movie a lot in that idea of, I always feel like there is a war going in my brain. I always feel like there's more than one voice. And now I know why that is. But this idea of the emotions kind of rubbing against each other, or these emotions actually having discussions and meetings, it made a lot of sense to me, because I feel like I'm always trying to manage my emotions and my sensitivities, and sometimes feeling so dramatic and other times feeling so down. And I know a lot of that now is tied to my neurodivergence. And like I said, I realized Inside Out's not necessarily talk about neurodivergence, but I think I was able to connect to this movie even more than other people, because I do feel my emotions and my thoughts are constantly at war, and there's so many of them, and they're constantly speaking and going on these adventures in their head. And so I connected to the movie because of the creativity. I love stories that are not afraid to use sort of fantasy and imagination to explore real issues. I mean, this movie is sort of looking at a young girl right before puberty. It's looking at a girl who's having to deal with the fact that she had to move across the country and she doesn't have friends, and she's trying to figure out, how do I go forward in life now that I'm stuck in California and this seems like a whole new world. All those, and even parents are they're losing touch with their daughter and they're trying to reconnect with her. Those are the real world, and they use kind of the fantasy elements of a fantasy version of the brain to deal with real family issues. And I'm always drawn to that. The idea of using imagination, creativity, but grounding it with ideas of family and parenting, or be it depression or mental health or social issues. If you can do it in a way that where it doesn't feel didactic, where people of different backgrounds can each get something out of it, I feel Inside Out is universal, because no matter your background, no matter the way of how your brain works, there is something you can grab from this movie. And so this movie inspires me because it's the type of storytelling I want, but also I can deeply connect with sort of that chaos of the brain and that chaos of emotions and how they're constantly meshing about. And I think it gives a lot of meaning to me. And so as a creative person, it inspires me to make sure that every piece I write, I want to entertain, I want to engage, but I also want it to have meaning. I want it to have something that can personally connect with people and have it be about something that you can attach to. And not every single person, like I said, I'm opposed to being overly didactic, but so not every person necessarily is going to connect with a work in the same way. And especially when it's a personal work, it's going to mean something to me when I tell that story. But if you do it with sort of, like I said, enough creativity and enough sort of that heart and soul, I think you can create something that is going to mean something differently to each person, but they'll still connect to it. And that is what Inside Out is to me. And I hope those ramblings made some kind of sense to you, because it does make sense to me. A few years ago on the podcast, I think I talked about how I could never really connect with anime. And that has massively changed because my son deeply loves anime, and because of his love, I've now gone to an anime convention, and I watch One Piece on a weekly basis with him as we're trying to go through that whole series, and I enjoy it quite a bit. But also because of him, I've gone through most of the Studio Ghibli movies, and not only have I watched most of the Studio Ghibli movies with him, but I love most of the Studio Ghibli movies. I think they're works of art. I think they are masterful. And so my last one here on this list is another supernatural fantasy, but one that I think really does inspire me creatively, and that's Spirited Away. Spirited Away is considered one of Hayao Miyazaki's masterpieces. It's one of Studio Ghibli's most acclaimed pictures. I think it's an absolute classic, and sort of the story is about sort of a girl who I believe her family is moving, and she is very frustrated with her parents at the moment. And then their car, I believe, breaks down. And so they go to this abandoned sort of fair, and their parents see all this freshly cooked food. They gobble it up and they get turned into pigs. And so this girl is trying to figure out a way to turn her parents back to humans, and all of a sudden she discovers that this fair is this alternate world, this world ruled by sort of a witch, and there's these different spirits and these different creatures. And one of the ways that it inspires me is, once again, just the incredible world building and the massive imagination, the colorful characters and the different creatures, and just the very vivid and elaborate world it creates. I just love the buildings, and it just feels like such a lived-in magical world with all the different homes and the streets and just the different characters and the life that it brings. It's one of those movies, I've talked about this before also on the podcast, where I just want to hang out in for a while, where I could just watch this movie just to enjoy the background and the visuals and the different characters, and just sort of, it's just this interesting world as a kid I would have loved to be swept to. And so there's that aspect where it inspires my creativity. It's just the amazing imagination there, and the just incredible, beautiful animation. If you feel that anime is just too weird for you, I do want to at least encourage you to try a few Studio Ghibli movies, because they're works of art. Even if the story's a little too bizarre for you, the animation is just incredible. It's just gorgeous. And like I said, I've said it 1,000 times here, but just it's full of just imagination. And I just love the artistry and the meticulous work that's put into this world. So that alone inspires me. But I love a journey. I love a quest. I love those just epic pictures, features where the character has to go on this journey, meet new characters, overcome a big problem, but on that journey they learn more about themselves. They grow. A great quest journey is truly about, in the end, there is that internal aspect where someone learns more about themselves. They come out of it a better person. And this 10-year-old girl on her journey, she does grow and she does become a better person. And all that type of stuff is what I love about storytelling, is this idea of sort of that transformation and what we can get out of it, and those characters we attach to, and those ideas of what would have I done in this situation, in this world. And I feel that Spirited Away captures all that. But it's also just, there is that aspect of storytelling and that idea of, again, sort of trying to be a better person and trying to leave that positive impact, and just the different people and how they want to control this world, and there is sort of the selfishness, but there is also the people who have that idea of trying to help others and leave a greater impact. And all that stuff, I feel, is great material of driving storytelling. Art is about wanting to make an impact in the world. Art is about trying to connect with people. Art is about wanting to try to make a difference. I feel that's what great storytelling is. I feel that's what a great movie is. And so watching Spirited Away does all that. It motivates me, it changes me, it transforms me, and it really wants me to tell great and amazing stories that can connect and make a difference. And so those are my 5 movies that I think are great for inspiring my creativity, but they're also just 5 movies that are worth watching. And that's Star Wars, Princess Bride, Chef, Inside Out, and Spirited Away. And if you want to tell me what is the movies that inspire you, make you want to create, or inspire you to go out and whittle some wood, then let me know at themoviebreakdown@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at Movie Breakdown 1. We also have a Facebook page at The Movie Breakdown. And a great way that you can help us is to subscribe and rate us on Spreaker Prime, Spotify, Castbox, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you love to listen to your podcast. We're almost everywhere. And another way you can really help out the podcast is listen to it on the Spreaker app. So that would be fantastic. And share us on social media. If you like this episode, pass the word. Another way you can help me out is check out the website, Beyond the Balcony. I recently wrote about how I enjoy watching Phineas and Ferb in One Piece with my kids. I've written a bit more about sort of my neurodivergence and that challenges, along with some of my big plans for the website and the podcast for the fall. I also talk about 7 life lessons I learned from playing Mayor Shin in The Music Man. So lots of stuff you can check out over on Beyond the Balcony. And I'll be back with you next week. And I should be reviewing a 2025 movie. Maybe even the long talked about Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul. So please come back next week. Thank you so much for listening to me this week. I'm Christopher Spicer, and have a great week at the movies.